everyone, welcome back. This is your week 2 PowerPoint module. And this week we're going to be talking about income and wealth and the impacts of one's own income or one's own wealth on physical and mental health. Also, the impacts of macro level income and wealth inequality on health. We have a few objectives for this week. The first is to describe how income and wealth are distal determinants of health. So remember that terminology, distal versus proximal determinants of health. The second is to delve more deeply into the Lincoln-Phelan article. This is probably the most dense article of the ones that you read for this week. We're going to explain Lincoln-Phelan's argument that social conditions are fundamental causes of disease. And then finally, we're going to consider implications for policy and social reform, particularly the implications related to fundamental causes. And here are your deliverables for this week. So as usual, you have the reading question due Monday night. You have the PowerPoint modules, so these 3 responses. Last week we had 4, this week you have 3. That's due Tuesday night. And then you do have one assignment due this Friday, and that is the course paper proposal. I went over the general prompt for the paper proposal at the end of the module from last week, so you can revisit that. And I also mentioned it in class this week. If you have any questions about the course paper proposal, please send me an email or come visit office hours this week. Here's your opening question for this week. So I want you to choose a disease or health outcome, perhaps the one that you plan to use for your course paper. So you can use this as some preparation for your proposal. I want you to speculate how income or wealth may act as distal determinants of the disease or outcome that you chose. How does income or wealth shape proximal determinants of the disease or outcome that you chose? So pause now. And you can find the link to answer this question on Inquire, and then you can come back when you're done. Before we talk about the health implications of income and wealth, I'm going to give you a very brief crash course on income and wealth inequality in the US. So what is the current state of income and wealth inequality? And I also want to clarify what we mean by income and what we mean by wealth. When we talk about income, we're typically talking about wages or salary. What paycheck do you take home? Wealth, on the other hand, is about assets. So instead of thinking about salary or wages, we're thinking about property that is owned, stocks and bonds, or other material possessions that are of value, such as a car. So that's wealth, different from income. Now, the extent of income inequality in the US is pretty alarming, and you actually see this on the figure that's on the left of this slide. The top 20% of earners in the US collect more than 50% of all of the income in the US. And this has actually been getting worse with time. So the top 20% have been accumulating more and more of the national income. In addition, you can see that the top 5% of earners make 23% of all the income. That's pretty huge. Wealth inequality in the US, you don't have a picture or figure of that here, but wealth inequality is even worse. The wealthiest 20% of people in the US own about 80% of the nation's wealth. That's astounding. So what I want you to do is actually to pause here. And I know this is a little different, we haven't done this before. I want you to pause here and watch the video that's on Inquire called Wealth Inequality in America. And this is a way of depicting wealth inequality better than I can do in a slide. It is a few years old, so it's from 2011, but the figures are still very relevant today. So this will give you a sense of the extent of wealth inequality in the US as well. So pause here, watch that, and come back. You don't have a question to answer for that video. Another way of thinking about or visualizing the extent of income and wealth inequality in the US is to compare the extent of inequality in the US to other countries. So here's a figure that shows you income inequality. So this is not looking at wealth, just income. It's looking at income shares of the top 1%. And it's looking in various countries, and it's giving you 2 time points. So around 1980 compared to 2010 to 2014. And what you see here, and these are economically comparable countries to the US by far has the greatest extent of inequality, or the most income going to the top 1% than any other country. And this has gotten more extreme over the past few decades. So if you compare the gray dot to the red dot, you can see that income shares for the top 1% have gotten much larger. And we see this to an extent in other countries, but not nearly to the same degree across time. After looking at the extent of income and wealth inequality in the US, and seeing that income and wealth inequality in the US is much wider or much larger than in other countries, the question becomes, how did we get here? How is the US uniquely in this position of having really high levels of income and wealth inequality? And to really get into the reasons for this, we think about structural conditions or structural factors, even intentional policy decisions that have gotten us to this point. This is just a quick list, and we're not connecting this to health quite yet, but I want you to have at least some understanding of the ways in which intentional policies and other decisions are shaping the extent of inequality in the US. So the first thing we could think about as a contributor to inequality is taxation. Taxes are a way in which governments redistribute income and wealth. Now, in the US, income is taxed more heavily than assets, meaning that one's income, what they take home, like their salary or their wages, is taxed more heavily than a home or a car or any other asset. Inheritance is another big one. So because of this, those with more assets, so the wealthy, are actually paying less in taxes. If we combine all different types of taxes, right? There's income tax, there's corporate tax, there's tax on assets. So the wealthy are actually contributing a lower proportion of their worth to through taxes than those of middle or lower income. And actually, in 2018, this was the first year that billionaires had a lower tax rate than the working class in the US. And this is what you see on the right of the screen. You see that the tax rate, overall tax rate for the 400 richest families in the US has been declining since the 1960s. The second is politics. We are in a time of wide political divisions, and wide political divisions block progressive legislation that's going to lessen inequality. I'll leave it there for now. Culture. The belief in picking yourself up from your bootstraps in order to achieve the American dream. We have a very individualistic culture that emphasizes how one's own decisions shape where they end up. Okay? We talked a bit about this last week as well. The other two, and I won't get into these in great detail, but weakening labor unions. So people in working and middle class households, or at that income level, can't bargain for higher wages. And we've seen the weakening of labor unions over the decades in the US. And then finally, unregulated executive or CEO compensation. This is why you see ridiculously high incomes for CEOs or other executives that are disproportionately higher than those who are maybe the typical worker in that business or organization. And the extent of inequality among those who are at the top versus those who are in the middle is in part shaped by this unregulated income growth. So this is just a summary of a few reasons why we have gotten here as a country. We could spend a whole semester on this, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. And this is your crash course on income and wealth inequality in the US. Now we're going to connect it to health. I want to shift gears at this point to spend some time on the health consequences of economic inequality. So we know that income and wealth inequality is very wide or large in the US. What are the health implications of the extent of this inequality? In order to get started with this larger discussion that will continue in our Zoom class this week, I want you to answer this video question and watch this video. So pause, I'm going to read the prompt, but afterward, pause to answer this question. I want you to watch Richard Wilkinson's TED Talk on how economic inequality harms societies. The link is on Inquire. We won't always do TED Talks. I know we've done 2 in a row, but we won't always do TED Talks. Answer this question. According to Wilkinson, what are the harmful consequences of economic inequality for societies? He goes through a lot of examples. How might psychosocial processes link economic inequality to poor health? He discusses this at about 12 minutes, 45 seconds in the video. So pause here, go to that video, and then answer the video question on Inquire, and then come back here for the rest. So far in this module, we've focused on the impacts of income and wealth inequality on health. So a very macro level perspective of how income and wealth shape health. Now I want to spend some time on really what was more directly covered in the readings, and that is the impact of one's own income or wealth on one's own health. Okay. Lincoln Phelan, this was one of the articles that you read, Social Conditions as Fundamental Causes of Disease. This is one of the more complicated articles. It's dense, it's more academic, but it is also a very important article, particularly in sociology, but also obviously has some far-reaching implications for public health. Now, I assigned this reading because the way in which Lincoln Phelan posed the argument that social conditions are fundamental causes of disease really has important implications for how we think about policies related to health and really the sources of health inequalities. I pulled out a few of the items that Lincoln Phelan say you can use to determine whether some social factor truly is a fundamental cause of disease. Okay, I have them listed right here. So how do we identify whether some social factor is a fundamental cause of disease? First, a fundamental cause affects access to health-promoting resources. And resources, as defined by Lincoln Phelan, includes money, knowledge, power, prestige, and social support and social networks. This is the first clue, I suppose, that we're dealing with a fundamental cause of disease. A fundamental cause also influences multiple risk factors and multiple health and disease outcomes. So it's not a very targeted causal chain. Rather, a fundamental cause of disease is going to affect all kinds of downstream or more proximal determinants of health and also impact multiple health outcomes. So it's not just, say, cardiovascular disease. We might also have diabetes or various infectious diseases and so on, all linked to this one fundamental cause. And then third, and this I think is the most complicated one, so we're going to spend a little more time on this, the link between a fundamental cause and a health or disease is persistent, even as risk factors that underlie the connection between a fundamental cause and health change across time, right? We're going to go through an example that is primarily going to focus in on this third point. So that's the next couple of slides. All right, now let's do an example in order to demonstrate really what Lincoln Phelan mean by social factors as fundamental causes of disease. What is a fundamental cause? And also to particularly demonstrate that third point on the previous slide, that there are multiple changing risk factors that are really mediating the relationship between social conditions and health outcomes. Let's say we're looking at the relationship between household income, nutrition, and child health. And we decide that in order to really break the chain here, in order to improve child nutrition, we're going to give free, healthy lunches to all kids at school. And this might do great things to close the gap in nutrition by income. And maybe it would even close the income gap in diet and nutrition altogether, although this is a tall order for lunch alone. So can we conclude then, great, we're able to get rid of this pathway through which household income shapes child health. Should we have solved the problem? Now, Link and Phelan are going to say, not so fast, right? You may have solved the nutrition issue, but household income is linked to child health through multiple intervening mechanisms, or we might call these multiple proximal determinants of health. It's not only diet and nutrition, but it's also physical activity, healthcare access, maybe exposure to stress. And this is not a complete list, there are a number of ways in which household income is linked to child health. Not only that, if we think about that third point on the previous slide, what they're arguing is that these intervening mechanisms actually change across time, across historical time. So for example, perhaps there is some great new medical breakthrough that is going to improve child health in some way or treat some disease that's common among children. This is hypothetical. Now, that new medical breakthrough is yet another intervening mechanism between income and child health, because who's going to be able to access or afford that new major medical breakthrough or that new procedure? It's going to be those who are higher income or more wealthy. And so what they're saying is, even if you try to knock out every single intervening mechanism that exists between household income and child health, you're never going to succeed in truly getting rid of those income disparities in child health, because new mechanisms or new proximal determinants are always going to be cropping up. And that's why they say that we need to tackle the fundamental causes of disease in order to truly eradicate health inequalities. In this example, that means tackling household income. We need to find a way to fix income inequality. We return to the theme at the beginning of this PowerPoint module. Now, this may be easier said than done, but ultimately, Link and Phelan are saying that we need to intervene on these fundamental causes if we really want to make progress in reducing health inequalities in a lasting and effective way. So now I ask your closing question: what are the policy implications of Link and Phelan's argument that social conditions are fundamental causes of disease? And I think I dropped some pretty heavy hints in the previous slide or earlier in the module. So you can return to the module to try to answer this question. Also, see page 89 of the article, where there is a section on the policy implications of their argument. So you can pause here, answer that closing question, and then come back for the last slide that describes what we're going to be doing in class this week. For class this week, we're going to be following our usual A-B schedule. So I'll see Group A on Wednesday, I'll see Group B on Friday, and we're going to discuss the causes and consequences of economic inequality in greater detail. I know we introduced it here. And then also discuss the implications of economic, or the causes of economic inequality for health-related policy. So we're going to expand on some of the topics that I briefly went over during this module. Okay? Come prepared to discuss. That's all I have for you. I will see you in class.